Hello, and welcome to Taste and See. This is a Peace Church Sunday School class, and I am your host, Todd Blanchon. Let's see what the Lord can do with us during this time.
Welcome to Taste and See. I'm your host for today. This is actually our 8th and final lesson, plumbing the depths of Psalm 34. We can't plumb all their depths, but we can do a little bit, and we can see what King David was talking about when he wrote this psalm. This is a very deep and a very rich song that he wrote at a time of great distress in his life. And each section, each of these lessons tells us something of very great deepness and of very great concern to God. In fact, David was called a man after God's own heart. And I really believe it was because he understood God. He got God. Not that he was less sinful than us or more righteous or more good or even better behaved in any way, because clearly the examples of his life show us that he was as sinful, if not more sinful, than every other man. But he understood God's heart, and when God says he's a man after my own heart, he really was saying, this is a guy who gets me. And so studying his songs and finding out what he thought about God is very valuable. We are going to talk about the last two verses in Psalm 34. I'm going to read them to get us started here, and then we'll go on. Psalm 34, starting in verse 21. Affliction will slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. So we have this ending of the psalm, and it talks about that the wicked, those who hate the righteous, they will be condemned, and that the Lord will redeem the lives of his servants. Well, we always have to ask the question, what does this mean? What did David mean by all this? Is he talking about, which some had presumed, that the wicked, that their own reaping and sowing would fall back on themselves, and that if you were basically a good person, that would come back on yourself? We like to think about that as a philosophy even today. You know, there are good people and there are not good people, right? Well, I hate to say it, but I don't think that's the way David viewed this thing, because at this time, at this moment, as the beginning of the psalm indicates, he was being chased by King Saul. He was actually in exile from his own country, and he was living with the people he had vowed to take out for the sake of his own people, the Philistines. And not only that, but he was in a very weak position. He was having to act like an idiot so that they didn't put him to death. He made him to think he was a bit of a madman or mental incompetent, and such that they were like, there's no value in us putting a mental idiot to death. So I think David was not talking about that he was seeing, or that he would see, even in his day, that the righteous would vanquish all evildoers. Perhaps he hoped on that, and I think we all hope on that. But I think he was talking about something much deeper and much more permanent, so to speak. And the reason I think that is because David didn't write just one song. He wrote many, and if you just turn your page to the next page, or maybe even 2 pages in your Bible, come across Psalm 37. And Psalm 37 kind of delves into this concept in great detail. And I'm not going to read all of it, but there's quite a bit here. And this is a Psalm of David. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Fret not yourselves because of evildoers, and do not be envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness." So David is addressing this conflict between doing the right thing, as the righteous should do, and doing what seems right in your own eyes, as evildoers do. And he continues on, verse 7, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourselves over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices." So he's telling us, as the righteous, not to be concerned about what appears to be evil's prosperities. This is probably very poignant today, in that we have a lot of things going on in this country. We have a lot of rhetoric that is deception in great amounts, what I call the spin deception, where partial truths are taken and then political philosophies take over and twist those partial truths into some greater reality that makes us angry and must force us to act, of course. And this is an evil, and these are evils. And it appears that people prosper from these. In fact, you have two candidates who, at the top of their game, so to speak, I mean, one of them will be president in the next couple of weeks. And it just strikes me as the ultimate in frustration when we see what we perceive as evil to prosper. And you've probably seen that in smaller parts in your own family, in your own neighborhood, maybe even in your own life. Maybe before you were a Christian, you could do whatever you wanted, and you could financially and otherwise gain from it, escape punishment, whatever. But the truth is, as David says, and he continues on in verse 9, "Evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the land." Now, did all those who do good inherit the land? I mean, I don't think David's a fool here. We're not fools. We know of good people who lived good lives, that loved the Lord, and died poor, died in a foreign land, not seeing the hope of their work fulfilled. Isn't that odd? Don't we know of righteous people who suffered great injustices and did not seem to have justice in their day? But David says here, wait on the Lord. For those who do that will inherit the land. He continues on, in just a little while, the wicked will be no more. In just a little while, the wicked will be no more. The meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. You know, Jesus quotes this and he says, the meek shall inherit the earth. So he extends that slightly beyond what the actual words in this psalm say, which seems to imply that this is an eternal inheritance. That David is not actually talking much about this lifetime. In fact, this is very, very clear. David lived around 1,000 years before Christ. And another prophet arose sometime later by the name of Malachi, who was it's estimated that Malachi lived in the mid-400s, so he was probably about 600 years after David. And I quoted from Malachi before because he wrote about our relationship to God quite a bit, and I quoted him with regard to tithing. Well, right after this discussion of tithing, this is what Malachi writes. He's in verse 16 of chapter 3. Malachi says, "Then those who feared the Lord spoke with one another. The Lord paid attention and heard them. And a book of remembrance was written before him of those who feared the Lord and esteemed his name." A book of remembrance. A book of remembrance. Where have we heard that before? Could it be that we heard that in John's discussion in the book of Revelation? In fact, it's towards the end of the book of Revelation, and I believe it is in chapter 20. And it says, starting in verse 12, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life," or the book of remembrance here. "And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up their dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire." So what I believe is happening here, folks, is that over the course of over 1,000 years of writings, this concept that David is floating here, this understanding of God and his eternality, is he's talking about the day of judgment when he says in verse 21, "Affliction will slay the wicked, and those that hate the righteous will be condemned." There is coming a judgment, a final judgment, a judgment on the dead and the living when Jesus returns. 2 books opened. One of those will be the book of deeds, the book of the dead. And that will be the account of everyone who is not in Christ, who will be judged according to their actions. And then there'll be the book of remembrance, the book of life. This is the book that God has written the name of his saints in. This is the book that will exonerate those of us who are called Christians, who are called saints, who David likes to refer to as the righteous here. We're not righteous because of what we have done. We are righteous because what Jesus has done for us. That makes us righteous. And the hope here is that we would respond by acting in some small way like the guy who gave his life for us, like Jesus himself. What would Jesus do, so to speak? That we would do goodness. kindness to others, that we would be kind to others, that we would not speak evil with our mouths, that we would trust in God, that vengeance is His. Did you hear that in Psalm 37? Repeatedly, and I only read a small portion of it, but Psalm 37 tells you all about these last two verses of this psalm, that we need to trust God and be patient and wait on Him, for He will bring evil back on evildoers, those who are not His. And some of the evildoers that we encounter now, some of those who are not in the camp of the righteous today, will be in the camp of the righteous on the day of final judgment. That's good news. You know, there was a time when I was not in the camp of the righteous. I knew it. I knew I wasn't saved. I heard about the good news of Jesus through a campus guy who was in my dorm my first year in college, and I knew as soon as he told me about Jesus that what he told me was true. I can't explain it. I really can't. I was enjoying myself. In fact, I had never had so much fun in all my life as my freshman year in college. But when this guy told me about who Jesus was and what He had done, it just fit like a glove. It made perfect sense to me. I understood that Jesus had been influencing my life all along, that He had been the one who I had looked up to even as a youth, even though I was a non-Christian, non-church-going kid, in my bed late at night, in the middle of my worries, and I looked to Him and I said, "Who are you and why do you like me?" It was obvious that somebody upstairs liked me, but I just couldn't figure out who He was. I was like, I don't know who you are, but you're obviously real and you're obviously personal, and I could go through many stories which would give you examples of that. But the truth is, even after I came to know Jesus, I didn't want to change my ways. I mean, I knew He was true, and I knew His name now, and I knew who He was, and I knew that I had inherited eternal life. But then I started reading the Bible, and the problem with the Bible is that it tells you how bad people are, and it tells you what the right thing is to do. And if you start with the Gospels, Jesus tells you very clearly this is the right thing to do. And if you look at it, and if you really look at it, you're going to find that, your life doesn't match up too well. And you're kind of like, So you have a choice to make at that point. You can either fight God, or you can go along. You can start to believe that maybe there's something more to this God-driven life than what you've experienced. But to be very honest with you, in my college days, there was a lot of fun yet to be had, and I will be very candid that for the first 10 years of being a Christian, I knew I was saved. But I really did not allow Jesus to be Lord of my life. I didn't allow Him to have control. I wanted control. And this is the problem. This is the problem of a self-driven life. Because the ultimate end of my being in control was disaster, was going back to last week's lesson, and it was brokenheartedness on my part. Now, the beautiful thing is God can do wonderful things when we become a mess and a disaster, and we hit our low point, and we hit bottom. And the nice thing about being at the very, very bottom is that all you can do is look up. I mean, you just can't look any other direction. And so he reached out, redeemed me, restored me, put me through some difficult times as a result of my poor behavior and poor choices. But he built me up. His kindness was far more than I deserved. And in verse 22 here of Psalm 34, it says, "None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." And so he led me on a path where I had to, at times, find my only solace and my only refuge in him. Have you been there yet? If you haven't, God is good and he is kind, and you will get there. And it's usually going to be because of choices you've made. Sometimes not. But I remember once having a boss who was of a different mindset. I had started walking with the Lord at this point, and he was not a person, at that time at least, that name would be found written in the book of life. And there's always hope that, God will redeem him and bless him with salvation, and that one day we'll meet again on the other side of life, true life, and I will get the joy of seeing that his redemption and hearing his story. But in this life, this man absolutely hated me. I mean, he hated every fiber of my being, and it was simply because I was God's man. He would tell a coarse joke and I wouldn't laugh at it. And I'd say, that's not really appropriate for the company we keep. He'd want to talk about pornography. He loved pornography. I had been redeemed from pornography. I didn't want to think about pornography. I certainly didn't want to talk about it. And I would shut him down. He would get angry at me. He would almost insist we talk about it. He was a person who looked at women as objects to be used, as opposed to people to be honored. And it just was a difficult relationship, and I wasn't trying to be obnoxiously moralistic with this guy. But I just found that in so many circumstances, I had to stop and say, listen, I can't do that. I can't go there. He loved to go to, those naked lady bars, and I was done with that lifestyle. That was not me anymore. He loved to drink heavily, and one drink is good enough for me. So he hated me, and he wanted to get rid of me. The problem was, I just happened to be his best employee. In fact, the previous 2 years, I had been the number one employee in the company as far as sales were concerned, and I was a sales guy at the time. And I was very valued all the way up and down the food chain, and so he realized that coming in, that I was thought well of, and he couldn't just fire me for being the good guy I was. So he sought to make my life miserable and try to drive me out of the organization. I was praying during the time, because once I realized that I was being the object of this evil intent, I thought, all right, I know how to solve this. I was well thought of enough at people at the highest levels of this company, including the CEO's office, that I knew I could walk in there, lay down what was going on, and I was pretty sure, because he was doing a lot of crazy stuff from an HR standpoint that was just really bad, and it wasn't just to me, it was to other people as well, that I knew I could probably get rid of him. So I would pray, Lord, I'm going to go do this, let me do this. And then I would read something, or I'd have the thought during prayer, no, hold your tongue. I'd be like, whoa, 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 what do you mean hold my tongue? This guy is telling lies. This guy is a bad person. This guy is an evil doer, right? And God would say, wait on me. And I heard this over and over and over. When I would read the scriptures, I'd hear it. When I'd get into deep prayer with God, I'd hear it. I'd hear it on the radio. I would hear it in the songs. I would pray and I'd be like, God, you've got to answer me. And I'd turn on the radio and there'd be a song saying, wait on the Lord. Don't do anything that might be considered evil. I'd be like, oh Lord, I can get this guy. I can get this guy. No, I can. And yet God said, no, no, no. Isn't that interesting? The Lord says, vengeance is His. But you know, our Dad in heaven is a good guy, as we learned last week. And we don't know who's saved. You know, I wonder what the righteous, the ones who knew they were saved and loved God and were trying to do the right things, thought of me when I was an early Christian, when I was that guy who, like my boss that I just complained about, did a lot of the wrong things. Loved to gamble, drink, hang out at bars that I shouldn't be hanging out at. Frankly, fill my mind with thoughts, greed, lusts, things that I had no business doing. And I wonder what the righteous thought about me during that time. The writers of the New Testament put it this way: do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that he will also reap. That's out of Galatians 6. And the writer of Hebrews adds, it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes judgment. So judgment is a set thing. It was set from the beginning of time to the end of time that there would be a judgment for all. At least after the fall there would be a judgment. There must be a judgment. And God has fixed a day on which He will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom He has appointed. And this is what Luke writes in Acts 17:31. And then Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. So there is a judgment. There is a judgment for all. There is a judgment for those who are outside of Christ, and there is a judgment for those who are inside of Christ. And we will one day stand before the man, and he will literally lay out our case before him, and we will be judged. The only question that comes from this is, where will we stand at the end? You know, the term last man standing applies here. You know, if in the days of old, if you were judged, you were taken quickly to have a sentence carried out, whether it was a sentence of execution or a sentence of imprisonment or a sentence of lashes, etc., that you were taken immediately. There was no chance for an appeal. And that will be the way it will be at our judgment day. There will be no chance of appeal. There will be no one to appeal to. The highest court in the universe will hear our case. And the only question that remains is are you sure you're going to end up on the right side of the verdict? In this world, you can end up on the right side of the verdict by just having enough money, paying really, really good lawyers. But in the next life, everything we have done will be laid bare, and everything we even thought will be displayed. So there will be no doubt as to motive, there will be no doubt as to what we did or did not do. And the question is this making you uncomfortable now? It makes me uncomfortable to think about it. Think about a time of judgment for every careless word that I've spoken. One of the very interesting things about Psalm 34 and David's recitation in the last two verses is verse 22, where David says, "The Lord redeems the life of his servants." There's two poignant things that we should consider there. One is that, are we his servants or are we not? I mean, who do we serve in this life? Are we serving ourselves? Do we serve other interests that are not godly? Or are we serving the Lord? You know, regardless of what we're actually doing. You know, you can serve the Lord by working in a meatpacking plant. You can serve the Lord by being a software programmer. The question is, are you serving him or are you serving some other purpose? Are you serving your ambition? Are you serving your greed? Are you serving your desire for man's approval? What is it that you are serving? When you go to work, when you get up in the morning, when you do the things you do, when you are in retirement, who do you serve? So that's the first question. The second question we all must ask ourselves is, what does the word redeem really mean? It's not a word we use a lot. Back in the day when there were stamps and, I know there are people who still use coupons quite a bit, but they're more and more rare, I would say. You would understand what redemption meant. But other than theological use, you don't see it that often. Yes, you can turn in a bottle for a deposit, that kind of redemption. But even that, I don't know where that's done anymore. It's not done here in North Carolina. Mandatory recycling is in effect, so you're supposed to turn in all your glass and aluminum. So what does redeem really mean? Well, if you look at the different translations, you find slightly different words there. And one of the words, for instance, the NIV translation, we use the ESV, which gives us the word redeem here, takes this Hebrew word, which is padah. And padah is a word that has a deeper, richer meaning than maybe we're getting from the word redeem. The NIV translates it rescue. But really, the term that seems to fit most often is ransom. In fact, the word padah actually means to cut free, as if you are bound. And so this idea of ransom, that you are being held captive and you are then bought, there's a price that is paid to get you back from the kidnappers. And when you are freed, the binds that are on your hands and maybe on your feet are cut free. They're loosed. And that's what the word actually technically means. It means to ransom. Now, in our country, the idea of ransom is maybe more of a movie idea. We don't we don't hear of it, but it's actually quite a common practice in the rest of the world. It's not uncommon, for instance, in Central America for people to be kidnapped and ransomed. And of course, how much money they get depends on how wealthy the person was or how important they were. So, very common practice. And this would have been something that would have even happened, I think, in David's day as well. I think he would have understood this quite well. So if we put in the word ransom, the Lord ransoms the life of his servant, then the question becomes, well, what price did he pay? Now you get to the discussion of who Jesus is. Because Jesus paid the price. He gave his life for our life. And I think David intuitively knew this. He knew this through the Holy Spirit speaking to him, speaking to his heart. He knew that the Lord would ransom them, that he was in trouble, that we are in trouble, that we are bound by sin in this world, and the only way that we can be freed is if somebody pays a price for us. Somebody pays to have us let go. And whether that price is reasonable or not, we can be assured, if we trust in Jesus, that he paid it all. That he paid every cent that was owed. So, on that day of judgment, when we stand before the great judge of all mankind, when he says, what do we have to say for ourselves? There'll be one who will stand up, the great counselor. His name is Jesus, the mediator between God and man. He will stand up and he will say, Father, this one's mine. That one is mine. And right there, the great judge will say, Pada has been paid. The ransom has been paid. That's pretty good news, isn't it? Hey folks, stick around. I've got a great recipe for you today. Help you understand about sauces. So hi, this is Todd. Today's recipe is going to be Texas barbecue chicken. Now, Kathy and I lived in Texas twice in our lifetime, once in the Dallas area and once in the Houston area. We also spent quite a bit of time in Oklahoma, and this could probably qualify as an Oklahoma recipe as well. But Texas barbecue has a unique flavor to it, and I'm trying to get to that flavor today, and we're going to do it by making a sauce, since this will be from scratch, and then we will cook chicken in kind of a special way, and I'll show you how to do that too. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you that some of the nice things that my children send me for my birthday. You can see that the lovely sticker here that I got, because I choose to believe there are things in this world that maybe might exist that we don't understand. And I also got a lovely card with a nice cassette tape on it, which of course is very current technology. And it says the birthday mixtape, and this is some of the songs that one of my daughters wrote in. Rock and roll till 6-ish and party at a reasonable volume. Hey Jude, does this look infected? Staying alive with blood pressure meds. RX drugs and rock and roll. born to run, quote, quote, to the bathroom every 5 minutes. My children are so sweet to me. And of course, this is another card sent by my other daughter indicating apparently some physical characteristic that I share with this animal. So today we're going to get started with the barbecue sauce.
So today we're going to make barbecue sauce. And what I'm going to actually teach you today is how to make pretty much any kind of sauce, salsa, topping, etc., based on your own interests as far as tastes are concerned. I've come up with this acronym here called BASHES. And BASHES for sauces indicates you have 5 components: base, acid, sweet, heat, and seasoning. To elaborate a little bit more on the BASHES acronym, the base is the bulk, it's the fiber, it's the basis of the sauce. It's typically the largest single ingredient that you're going to have in there. And you want something that kind of holds up, that has some body to it, some thickness to it. And a lot of things have fiber in them. A lot of things have a substance, and you shouldn't limit yourself to one thing. But and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Your acid component is what kind of tingles your tongue. Your tongue tastes acid, and we want that tanginess to come out. It is in the sweet and sour. This is the sour part, right? The sweet part. Turns out that in most grocery store bought barbecue sauces, this is actually the first ingredient that is listed. In the clever ones, they will split it into 2. They'll put in, say, cane sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and so they could list it as ingredients 2 and 3 on there. But make no doubt, the sugary element is very, very important in barbecue sauce. In fact, it's one of the most important elements in most meat sauces because we like a salty meat with a slightly sweet dressing. And there's lots of different sweets. Heat. This is the peppery thing that lingers, that kind of warms up the mouth, that kind of affects the back of the tongue, that possibly even goes up into the sinuses and involves that part of our body, depending on what kind of heat we get. And finally, the last S is seasonings, flavorings such as herbs and especially salt. Don't forget the salt. Seasonings are very numerous, and literally the combination of these 5 things there's probably millions of combinations here that you can put together. And so you can make your own unique sauce. And if you understand these 5 things, you'll understand how to adjust sauces that you've bought that maybe you don't like so well, and you want to make them a little better. So the B in BASHES stands for base. The most common base in barbecue sauce is a tomato-based sauce. Some recipes call for paste, others called for diced tomatoes. We have a recipe that uses rotel, which is an already spicy cooked mix. You can use stewed tomatoes. You can use tomatillos, which is more of a Mexican flavor kind of thing, the green tomato there. Today we're going to use ketchup, and I love ketchup because it already has the BASHES ingredients in it. It has already some acid, some sweet. It doesn't usually have much heat, but it definitely has some seasonings in it. And so tomato ketchup gets you quite a bit of the way there without adding a lot of other ingredients. Other bases, though, and I just want to point this out to you because it shouldn't limit you. You don't have to make a barbecue sauce with tomato. You can make it with pineapple, for instance. You could make it with onion. You can cook onion. Onion has a wonderful fiber content. It tends to be a little on the sweet side, and cooked chopped onion makes a wonderful base for barbecue sauce. My daughter loves to make a salsa that is made out of mango and avocado. And this salsa is delicious. It is a wonderful topping. The acid component is pretty straightforward. Vinegar and almost any kind of vinegar, whether it's balsamic or apple cider or whatever, red wine vinegar, just distilled vinegar as shown here, contains acid, and it usually lists the percentage of acid. The higher the acidity content, the tangier it is. Of course, any citrus has citric acid and other acids in it that make it very tangy. Tomatoes actually have a good bit of acid in them, and that adds to the flavor as well. I'd also like to point out both prepared and regular mustard. These are very tangy elements. Prepared mustard actually has vinegar in it in most cases, so it has a double layer of tang. And one of my favorite acids to add is actually wine. Using wine as a mix-in can really have a beautiful flavor additive to this. If you cook these, you'll cook the alcohol out, so you won't taste that part, but the flavor will be left behind. The sweet components are numerous. Everything from sugars, such as the white sugar depicted here, to brown sugars, molasses, honeys. Agave is a sugar. Maple syrup is a straight up sugar, but each of them have their own flavor profiles. You could also use fruit juices. Orange juice, for instance, is extremely sweet, but many of the juices are mostly sugar. Grape juice is largely a sugar. My favorite secret ingredient is to use preserves, fruit preserves. In fact, I love using that because most of the fruit preserves will have in them an acid. They'll have citric acid already added. It'll be balanced. And they'll also have thickeners in it, so you can use it even as a base. They'll have pectin in it, for instance. And they have this beautiful, lively fruit flavor. And one of my favorite sauces of all time is just taking a cup of blackberry or seedless raspberry preserves and cooking that with a cup of red wine, like a Cabernet or Merlot, and adding just a little bit of black pepper. You cook it down till it's a nice syrupy mixture, and then using that as a drizzle on a red meat, such as a venison or a beef. It is just absolutely delightful. My son-in-law Josh taught me that, and it was a lesson well learned. Then comes the heat. Many, many sources of heat. I love jalapenos. If you don't like the heat of jalapenos, if you actually remove the seeds, slice them long ways and remove the seeds, jalapenos only have a very slight heat element to them, and have quite a bit of flavor. Ginger is a delightful root here depicted just to the right of the jalapeno. You can also get it as crystallized ginger, which has the sugar or the sweet added into it. On the bottom, you're seeing horseradish. That is wonderful. Don't forget black pepper. Black pepper actually has heat to it and actually has a wonderful flavor profile. So if you're not into a lot of heat, that would be a good one. Texas Pete, actually made here in North Carolina, originated in North Carolina, is a delightful hot sauce, not too hot. And chili powder, which we're going to actually use just a little bit today to flavor our Texas-style barbecue. Your final S stands for seasonings. The most common seasonings that I use are garlic and salt, and I think they're very common for most people. There are a myriad of other herbs and minerals that you could use. I don't really have time to go into all of them. I happen to be very favorable to fresh rosemary and thyme. Those are lovely, lovely flavors, but there's so many, depending on the situation, that you're going to need to find out what you like. And the best way to do that is just to get some and to try it. Don't be afraid to pull these seasonings out and suck on them. If they're a dried seasoning, give them a minute in your mouth, put them on your tongue, find out why you like them, and then start using them in your recipes. So, Texas style barbecue sauce. Here we go. Very simple. We're going to start with 1 cup of ketchup. This is our base. We're going to add to that 2 acids. 1 teaspoon of yellow prepared mustard. That's just the stuff out of the plastic container there. And a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. You're going to add to that the sweetener, which is the brown sugar. That's 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Brown sugar, by the way, is simply white sugar with molasses in it. That's all it is. And then we're going to add our H in our bashes, 1 teaspoon chili powder. And then the 3 seasonings. We're going to add a teaspoon of chopped garlic. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of mesquite liquid smoke, because it's Texas style barbecue, and mesquite is the flavor of Texas. It's the wood that is commonly used to create barbecue. And then we're going to do 1 medium onion cooked in butter. So we're going to start off with the onion. You're going to cook it in butter till it's semi-soft, translucent. And then you're just going to add the other ingredients except for the liquid smoke. You're going to bring it to a boil, lower it, make sure everything is dissolved. It doesn't take long. 10, 15 minutes on the stove will easily get you to where you want to be. And let those flavors begin to meld. When you're kind of done cooking it, then you add your tablespoon of mesquite liquid smoke. You don't want to just boil that away, because that's mostly an aroma that you're looking for.
So I'm now going to teach you our special way of cooking chicken on the grill, and it's sort of partly on the grill and partly in the oven. In fact, this is a great way to cook meats that have bone in them that you have a hard time getting done. So things like chicken leg quarters, which is what I've got here, or ribs, or anything with a bone in it that you want completely done. This recipe will be very satisfying to you. So what I've done is I have my chicken leg quarters. I have salted and peppered them. I have my grill. I've got it cranked up over 500 degrees here. I'm now going to put my chicken on this grill, and the point of this is to get a char on the chicken. I love the fattiness of leg quarters. So we don't mind it flaming up. In fact, the ultimate goal here is really burnt chicken. And we don't want to fully cook the chicken. We just want to be out here for maybe 10 to 20 minutes depending on your grill temperature, and to get that chicken nice and kind of crispy on the outside, so to speak, even if it's burned. In fact, if the skin is burned, it will turn out actually quite lovely. So we're going to let it go. We're even going to let it flame up a little bit. And then we're going to transfer it, when we're done, to a pan that allows the juices to drip through. And we're going to cover it in tin foil. We're going to put our barbecue sauce that we've just made on top. And we're going to bake it in the oven covered for about 30 to 45 minutes. And when we pull it out, it'll be tender, It'll be smoky, it'll be delicious, and it will be fork cuttable. This is kind of what we're looking for here, folks. A nice char on the outside of our chicken.